All right, and now let's go to the NFC, the older of the two conferences, the established conference. Let's start in the always fun NFC West. You got San Francisco, who was a fumbly kick returner away from going to the Super Bowl last year. Believe it or not, as weird as it sounds, the NFC West has had a lot of playoff success for how bad they've got the reputation of being in the regular season. Arizona, Seattle have both been to the Super Bowl since the realignment. The Rams made it the year before, and of course were a really good team in 03, been in the playoffs other time as well. And then San Francisco made it to the overtime in the NFC Championship game last year. So as much fun as people have making fun of the NFC West, they tend to put their money where their mouth is come crunch time. With that being said, I'll start with my fourth place team, the St. Louis Rams, who won as many games the last 5 years as the Green Bay Packers won in 2011, which is pretty embarrassing. They now have Jeff Fisher, which I really like Jeff Fisher, but I always thought he was somewhat overrated in Tennessee. He gets this reputation like he's like Bill Cowher or something, when in actuality Jeff Fisher was in Tennessee for 16 seasons, got him to one Super Bowl, a couple good years here and there, but really spent the last 5-6 years with everybody calling him a great coach and his team's underperforming. I'll say Seattle will go 8-8. I really like this team in a lot of ways, and then there's other parts of them that really are unproven. I don't really trust yet. The quarterback position, I would like to see Matt Flynn win the job, but I don't know exactly what's going to happen out there yet, but I think Seattle could finish 8-8. I think Arizona is going to be 8-8 as well, so you can flip-flop them in Seattle, but I just picked Arizona second here. I thought they came on strong in the second half of last year. If they could look at what they did, they can score points somewhat. I think they're a scrappy team. I can't really describe why I think they'll go 8-8, but Ken Wisenhunt's a lot better coach than I thought he would be, and so I think Arizona is going to do okay in that division. And despite me being very skeptical of how good San Francisco was last year, I think they were a good team. I think they had a really good defense. I don't think they were as good as their record, but I still see them going 11-5 and winning this division pretty easily.
Okay, yeah, and I agree. I think St. Louis is easily the bottom feeder on this division here. I could see a little bit of a bounce back. Maybe Bradford plays a little better, but they're just not good enough. This defense is bad. Jackson's getting old. Really no receiving depth, so I would say maybe 3-13, 4-12. And the next three I kind of had a hard time with here. I know in our previous episode I picked Seattle as kind of my dark horse this year, but I'm kind of backing off that a little bit just because Marshawn Lynch arrested for another DUI. I'm assuming he's going to be suspended for at least a few games, considering he's a multiple-time offender.
Yeah.
And Matt Flynn, I thought he was going to be the clear starter here, and the fact that it seems like there's such a controversy and that he hasn't clearly, taken Travaris Jackson's job yet.
Yeah, that's got to be concerning for them.
Yeah, that kind of scares me a little bit. You wouldn't think that would be too tough of a job to win over, so I kind of back off that a little bit. I have Seattle at 8-8 as well, and Arizona at 8-8 as well. But I think Arizona really has the potential to maybe even win this division this year. I think this is a really good team, but it all depends on Kevin Cobb.
Yeah.
They have a good running game in Beanie Wells, and Ryan Williams, is that the Virginia Tech guy that they drafted, the running back?
Yep.
And then they have obviously Larry Fitzgerald, Michael Floyd. So I think it's a good young receiving core, a good defense. They played really well at the end of the year and won a lot of games. So I think this team has a chance to be really good. And I have San Francisco in first place with probably a pretty good record for beating up on St. Louis and some other weak teams, but I really wouldn't be too shocked if they had another drop-off. We've seen them do it before. Mm-hmm. But that defense is so good, and I think the run game is probably good enough that they win the division again. But I'll say probably around 10-6 for them winning the division.
Okay. Yeah, looks like we're pretty much on the same page with that. Let's go to the NFC East. Some of the most successful franchises in NFL history reside there. Of course, the defending Super Bowl champion New York Giants, I'm still not used to saying that, are in the NFC East. You have the Philadelphia Eagles, who was everybody's pick last year to go to the Super Bowl, the Dallas Cowboys, and then, of course, the Washington Redskins. I'll start at the bottom. I think Washington is going to be around 5-11 again. I fully expect RG3 to be pretty productive in his first year. I also think he'll make a lot of mistakes. I'm almost expecting him to have the almost identical season that Cam Newton had last year. Feels like the talent level around him may be a little better, but I just don't expect much from him, especially in the NFC. You just have a lot of tough opponents that he's going to lose a lot of close games, I think, but at the end it's going to look bad. So I think 5-11 for Washington. I think Dallas is not going to do much of anything. I have them actually at 7-9. I feel like their window of opportunity was never that wide open to begin with, and I think it's slowly closing. Tony Romo, I always thought was a little bit more harshly criticized than he deserved, but the last few years, even when he was healthy, he just hasn't been all that impressive. They have some talent, but I just don't trust them to put it all together. I have at 11-5, I have the other two teams in the division, both at 11-5. I actually have Philadelphia winning the division. I have the New York Giants at 11-5. They always seem to respond to their fluky playoff years with a really solid regular season. And Philadelphia came on really strong last year. I feel like they're going to be out to prove something this year. I think Michael Vick obviously has to stay healthy, but I think they'll be able to make somewhat of a charge. I'm almost expecting them to start really, really hot and then sort of cool off towards the end of the year, but I think they're going to win the division at 11-5 over the 11-5 New York Giants.
Okay, yeah, and I completely agree with your Washington pick. I think that RG3 is going to be a lot like Cam Newton, probably a pretty similar record, pretty similar talent around him. So I'll agree with you there. Probably have a lot of close games, be a tough team to play against, but probably not the record that they want to have, maybe 5-11, 6-10. I have Dallas finishing a little better than you, probably 9-7, I would say. I think DeMarco Murray looked pretty darn good last season. Romo's good enough. Obviously, this team's good enough to win games, but again, I don't think they're good enough to be elite. And as far as the top of the division, I agree with you. Philadelphia, I think they will finish just behind New York. I think Philly's going to go 10-6. I think the reason I don't trust this team is because Michael Vick. I think if they had really any kind of ball control, offense, quarterback, even say like maybe Matt Schaub or Joe Flacco, just kind of a good quarterback, not great, I would maybe pick this team to go to the Super Bowl just because the run game's there. They have a ton of receiving talent. Mm-hmm. The defense is loaded. I just don't trust him. He's going to put up numbers, but I just don't trust him to win big games.
You don't think they can put in Trent Edwards and cruise to the Super Bowl?
No, I don't think so. Vic's probably the best option they have on the roster, but I think he's good enough to have him finish with a good record, not good enough to really make a serious playoff run.
Okay.
And then the Giants at 11-5, like you said, just all around solid. Really, probably about as all around talented as about anybody in the NFC. Maybe along with us in Chicago, those kind of teams. So I'll say that they win the division.
Okay. Yeah, I can't really disagree with that because I struggle with that pick a lot. But, yeah, general consensus, I guess, between the two of us is that the Giants and Philly are the two teams to beat there. Going on to the NFC South, which obviously this is a real interesting division with the New Orleans Saints problems this offseason. We'll start at the bottom. I think Tampa Bay is going to have a rough go of it. I picked them to go 5-11, and I actually think that's being a little generous. I thought their 10-6 team the year before was one of the most unexplainable things I've ever seen in the NFL. They just don't seem to be very talented anywhere. They got some guys that are okay and on a week-to-week occasion can do some things, but they just don't seem to be good enough at any particular position to really threaten the other teams in that division. So I have them at 5-11. I think Carolina's going to be better this year, but not noticeably better. I still think even with as bad as New Orleans offseason has been, probably the worst a team has had in the last 50 years, I still think they're strong enough, and Atlanta, I think, is still solid enough to hold off Carolina. And I think Carolina's going to lose a lot of cheap ones to some really good teams. They're just too young. So I have them going 7-9, which is one game better than they were last year. I have New Orleans taking a bit of a slide. I think they're going to go 9-7. I think they're still a really, really talented team, but it's going to be really hard for them. And I have a feeling that a lot of teams are going to be jazzed up to play the Saints. They're going to be the team that everybody's going to want to beat, and they're going to want to beat really bad. Especially even with the bounty, I felt like everybody in the NFL knew last year that the New Orleans Saints were just trying to run up the score on people down at the Superdome, which more power to them. But if I was on a football team, I certainly wouldn't like that to happen to me. So they got some tough games too, especially coming to Green Bay, and they're gonna have to play the Giants again, and they're gonna have to play the Niners again, and these teams are good enough to really put the hurt on a team in disarray like that. So I think New Orleans is gonna slide, but they're gonna definitely win enough to stay in playoff contention. And I think Atlanta's gonna sneak away with this division with a 10-6 record. Never been all that impressed with the Mike Smith, Matt Ryan group, but they always seem to win games. It'll be another Atlanta Falcons season. They'll average 24 points a game. They'll give up about 18, and they'll win more than they lose. So I think Atlanta will win this division this year, barely at 10-6.
All right, I think I agree with you. Tampa at the bottom. I think this is probably the worst team in football, maybe along with Jacksonville, one of the two there. But Tampa being in the NFC, I'd think maybe 3-13. I've never been sold on Josh Freeman, even when he played well. I just didn't see it, I guess. And
I wasn't sold on him at Kansas State.
Yeah, so I don't think if he's their best player, I just don't think they have enough talent. So I say 3-13 there. Carolina, I think this team is talented enough to maybe make a run at a wild card, but I don't think it's quite this season yet. I think this is a team probably next year we'll be talking about, all right, they're ready to make a playoff run. So I think about 8-8 there. New Orleans, I agree, probably a little bit of a slide. I actually have them missing the playoffs barely, finishing 10-6. Their defense was bad enough, and now they lose Vilma, one of their leaders, one of their best players, and I think it's just such a distraction. Like, even today, Drew Brees came out and said the things about Roger Goodell, and nobody trusts him. It just seems like the focus is elsewhere, and it's just an excuse for them to, have a mediocre season. And I think Atlanta's actually going to finish 12-4.
Oh, wow.
You look at their schedule this year, I was kind of looking at it a little bit. They have 10 indoor games, and they only play 3 10-win opponents all season, and only one of those is on the road.
Oh, wow.
So I think it's one of the easiest schedules in football. They have all these dome games, and that's where they're best. And I just think they're good enough to beat some of these good teams and finish with a really good record. Although I maybe don't feel like they're a 12-4 team, I feel like their record's going to be right up there.
Okay, yeah, I can see that. Those are some good arguments. I didn't realize they had that many indoor games. But all right, and now to the main event, the division that contains our Green Bay Packers. Let's start at the bottom. No surprises here. The Minnesota Vikings. At least they got their stadium done, so they got that to hang their hat on. But I don't see many bright days ahead for the Minnesota Vikings. Adrian Peterson coming off a big injury, and so I have a Minnesota going about 5-11. I feel that's a little high. I always tend to pick teams a little bit more conservatively, but I wouldn't be surprised if they went 3-13. I wouldn't be surprised if they went 6-10, but I don't think they'll lose double digits. I'm pretty sure of. This is where we might differ a little bit. I picked Detroit to be third, only at 9-7. I felt last year they were a bit of a fraud, starting 5-0, finishing 6-5 in their last 11 games. I really think this team is good and young, but I just don't feel they can hold it together, especially being a second-place team. They're going to have some tough games this year. And especially when they have two other teams that are very good in that division, I'm not sure Detroit can stay in it the whole season. They just, even in the off season, when anybody remarks about them, they just seem like the dude in the tap-out shirt standing by the bar, and you're just waiting for them to blow up. And when you got a 4-month grind, I just don't think that spells good things for Detroit. They'll be in the mix, but I don't think they're going to make the step that some people seem to expect. This actually was a lot harder for me than I thought it would be, trying to pick who would win this division. And maybe I didn't go completely with my own objective analysis, but second place I picked the Chicago Bears. I think they'll be 11-5. I wouldn't be surprised if they were 12-4, or honestly I wouldn't even be that surprised if they were maybe even 13-3. I think this team is really, really good this year. Jay Cutler, obviously, coming back from an injury, but he was playing red hot last year. The whole team was playing red hot. When Jay Cutler got hurt, or right before he got hurt, they were the team that I was worried was going to come in and beat the Packers in the playoffs. I really didn't expect it to happen from the Giants, but the Bears I was scared to death of. They have Matt Forte, they have Michael Bush, they have Brandon Marshall. Even without all Michael Bush and Brandon Marshall last year, they were scoring a lot of points. I still think that defense is young enough to bully some teams. Julius Peppers, when he is on, he might be the best defensive lineman in the NFL, maybe even the best defensive player. So I think the Bears will be 11-5, and I think the Green Bay Packers will still win the division. Their defense at times scares me to death, but I just think their schedule's pretty easy relatively for the talent they have. I just think they're going to score. If their guys can stay healthy, their core guys, I just think they're going to score too many points for most teams in football, and I actually picked them to have the best record in the league this year with 13-3. So I think the Packers will be the 1 seed once again.
And I completely agree with you on most of these here. Minnesota at the bottom, I would say probably about 4-12. Move along here. Detroit, I completely agree. I don't think this team has the mental fortitude or even the intelligence. I mean, you look at what's happened this offseason. It's like, you got to be kidding me. These guys are getting arrested, multiple times for the same thing, making millions of dollars and getting arrested for, a DUI twice. It just doesn't make sense to me, and this defense isn't good enough. The defensive line might be good, but we've yet to really see that come together with their young players, and Fairley's been in trouble constantly. The only two players I like on this team really are Stafford and Johnson, and I don't know if that's quite enough to get you to the playoffs again.
Yeah.
Chicago, I keep hearing all offseason how this is the best team in the NFC, and I keep being like, are you kidding me? Like, what about the Packers? And I keep hearing about how deep they are, but I guess this offensive line is pretty poor. And the defense is just, I'm not completely sold. Peppers is good. Urlacher's getting older. Briggs is getting older. I don't really know too many of their secondary guys. I don't think it's one of the top 5 defenses anymore, and I think they'll be good. The Brandon Marshall signing scares me a lot as a Packer fan.
Yeah.
I think this offense is going to be really dynamic, but I guess we'll have to see how the offensive line plays. In my opinion, they could be really good if that offensive line comes together, but I think that's the key. So I'll say maybe 10-6 for them.
Okay.
And 13-3 for the Packers. Completely agree. I wouldn't be surprised if they went 14-2. One of the best overall teams in the NFL. The defense, I think, will be better. We'll see what happens in the secondary, but otherwise, I think they're good enough to kind of pull off again what they were last year. I definitely don't think they're any worse than they were last year. I don't know necessarily if that means they'll go 15-1 again, but I think they're right where they were last year.